So good evening and welcome back. Welcome to the first landscape architecture sponsored talk in the GSD's fall series. Welcome to the new Petroblaze inside-outside curtain, pretty amazing. Thanks to Ben Prosky and his team for all of their work to get us here. Our speakers tonight are Gerdo, Aquino, and Ying-Yu, Hung. Ying-Yu Hung is managing principal of SWA Los Angeles and in the LA office was co-founder of something called the Infrastructure Research Initiative that I'll see something more about in a moment. She's also visiting assistant professor at the University of Southern California, where she's taught over the past several years. Ying-Yu's professional and academic work focuses on the relationship between urban systems and the potential for landscape relative to infrastructure and urbanism. She's received multiple awards, including ASLA honors, including a National Honor Award, as well as a range of other awards and honors nationally and internationally. She pursued her Master of Landscape Architecture degree here at the GSD, following from her undergraduate work at the University of California at Berkeley. Gerdo Aquino is president of SWA, a firm that I'll, again, say something more about in a moment. Out of Los Angeles, Aquino is an extraordinarily accomplished landscape architect and urban designer who focuses on the public realm in relationship between the various communities and collaborative consultants that inform their work. Gerdo also graduated from our program, the MLA, here at the GSD, following his undergraduate work at the University of Florida. And so I'm just thrilled that Ying-Yu and Gerdo are with us this evening. It's really a pleasure to host them here in the first of our fall talks. For a number of reasons, I think it's timely that they're with us, in addition to the fact that they're really noted leaders that have emerged from our own MLA program here at the GSD, and also timely because of the recent publication that they co-authored called Infrastructure Landscape that I think they'll say something more about in the context of their talk. Of course, SWA, the Sasaki Walker Associates firm, the origin myth of the firm itself and its own institutional affiliation as a part of this interest here. Founded just over 50 years ago, SWA came to define a kind of international, mid-sized corporate practice in the best senses of the word, and the idea that SWA then transitioned after Sasaki and Walker moved on is also interesting to this story. And I think the idea that SWA had the courage to launch in their Los Angeles office what I've referred to in my introduction to the book as a kind of boutique office in the context of a larger multinational presence is, I think, interesting here. Equally interesting is that they charged Gerdo and Ying-Yu with organizing both the intellectual presence within the office but also the practical development of new lines of work. And that experiment worked so well, and I say more about this in my introduction, that the work that they produced over the course of the last several years in the Los Angeles office is really quite extraordinary in terms of the high level of design exploration at the relationship between ecology and urbanism. This experiment worked so well that they named Ying-Yu the managing principal of the LA office and Gerdo president of the whole operation. And so I think we're at an interesting moment where the third generation of leadership of SWA are now in a place to take the boutique kind of guerrilla operation within the LA office to the next scale of operation. Please join me in welcoming Aquino and Hung.
Thank you, Charles, for that wonderful introduction. It's a real honor to be here at the GSD, having graduated way over 10 years ago, and to kind of look at the desks and the studios and to kind of feel the energy that you guys are involved in with your work is different. There's a little shift going on here at the GSD that you can take note of. And essentially what this presentation is about is this notion of transpositional futures, in that we're very interested in the kind of changes that happen in the landscape, and even more interested in the specific mechanisms of change within landscapes, whether urban or rural. And we're also interested in the potentiality for solutions to have different futures, that there isn't just one solution, but by exploring 3 or 4 or 6 futures for any given site and for any given program, we might reveal something extraordinary and unique. You know, it was the rail and infrastructure that opened up the West. California, if anything, is a state that really depends on its infrastructure as a means to exploring new territories. And today, infrastructure is different. It's much more complex. You know, technology has taken infrastructure in new directions that we have yet to resolve within the confines and platforms within which we work.
As Charles had mentioned earlier, we're SWA, but our studio is based in Los Angeles. As you're probably very familiar with, that Los Angeles is a city created for mobility, as it is identified on this postcard from the 1950s. And even today, Los Angeles is still very much dominated by freeways, and the way we go about from place to place is, constantly, being struggling, fighting traffic to get, to be able to get to places. And Los Angeles, there's downtown over there. The previous slide here showing the red circle showing where downtown is. As you can see today, Los Angeles, there's no semblance of what it used to be. What you're seeing, Los Angeles Basin, actually used to be the watershed of Los Angeles River, but today it's completely inundated by development and mostly gray. Then we say, well, where are the greens? Where are the parks? And it's one of the most park-poor cities in the world. And that's really the reason why we decided to go there. We wanted to find the worst places in the environment and really try to figure out what's wrong and what can we do about them. This is downtown. Behind that, on a really nice, beautiful day when we don't have smog, it's actually a beautiful city. It's got mountains in the back, and then the skyline, and then a lot of sprawl. What you're seeing here is Griffith Park Observatory. It's the mountains behind downtown. Even though it is one of the biggest public parks in the United States, unfortunately, it's not very accessible. And it hasn't been very well programmed and connected to the city to make it available for its citizens. And, interestingly enough, back in the 1930s, there was actually a master plan developed by Olmsted, the thought of maybe perhaps linking this city through green corridor or ecological or green corridors as a way of going from place to place. And of course, this never happened, and our rivers and creeks became these concrete channels. This is what we see today. What we're seeing as well is this, the ability of civil engineers and planners and all kinds of really, amazing people, their ability to create these channelized waterways that only work during its peak hours. The function of this is really to get as much water out of the city within the shortest time possible, and the rest of the time it looks like this, and creates this barrier to the city where no one knows what to do with. And similarly, on the streets, we're seeing these very overscale wide streets. Most of the time, they're sort of empty. And how do you address this sort of situations that's permeating throughout our entire urban fabric? And then, of course, the city has only 13 street sections to work with, and we have a city of over 10 million people, so how does this happen, And so we're interested in figuring this out. It's like, why are we dealing with this situation? And then we get these alleyways too big, nobody uses them, and people started to think, well, maybe there are alternatives to making these leftover residual spaces more about people, about habitat and ecology. And then, of course, you all know LA is Hollywood in many respects. Our city, a lot of these places are great places for filming, and interesting, it takes people at a local level, individuals, artists, to figure out an alternative function to some sort of to a channelized waterway like this one. And then this is right in front of our office, where our sidewalks, they're not just for people, but sometimes they become completely occupied by the filming industry. So it's actually a very dynamic sidewalk. It's full of spontaneity and unpredictability. And of course, city of mobility. What do you do with, your hardware store, your iron shop? Why not put in the car and truck it around so that you could start, fixing people as you go? And then, this legacy of Koji truck has created such a following on Twitter that many cities have followed suit. Recently we counted that there's more than 300 gourmet food trucks all over the city, and it's becoming, it's such a phenomenon, and it tells you that perhaps, our lifestyle doesn't remain the way it is, that things shift, new things happen, people come up with new ideas. This is a, so many food trucks, so what do you do with competition? This is a Kuhas ice cream food truck. So as a way of standing to competition, there's, the hybridized, the boutique version of that as well. And then again, there's these residual spaces, as mentioned earlier, that most of the time it's used for something else. During the day, it's a car wash, but at night, it's actually another venue of economy for somebody who wants to make an extra buck. So what I'm trying to say is that the city operates at a different level, where a lot of things are streamlined for efficiency, but then the people manage to somehow find another meaning, a new meaning beyond this sort of infrastructural city we live in. A little bit about our studio. Our studio is about 20 people, and we're a whole bunch of crazy super achievers. We're always trying to argue with each other. This is just right near our office, not too far. And our office, another interesting story is owned by the lawyers who fought for O.J. Simpson. But in front of it, there's constant parties, and so it's about stage setting, about theater, a lot of things happening here. In our studio, we don't think design comes out of nowhere, that you have this magic wand and you sort of point around and things happen. We don't believe in that sort of thing. It's not instantaneous. And it's not also one-man rule, that the guy sitting in front of the desk calls the shots and everybody has to meekly follow. We don't believe in that sort of design process. Instead, we believe that we all sit around and duke each other out, and then try to brainstorm on different opportunities and shred and that sort of thing. In terms of research, Charles mentioned a little bit earlier about infrastructure research initiative, and really it's because we're inundated by all these things happen in the city, and we want to be able to make clear and categorize and understand why things happen. And so this sort of side job occurred where we looked at infrastructure as one component of the urban fabric and try to understand what's its innate DNA and whether there's opportunity for hybridizing, repurposing, repositioning the infrastructure, and hopefully making the city we live in a little bit more better to live. This is just a diagram that one of our students did at USC, try to quantify or categorize understanding what are these residual spaces under the freeways, and she spent a lot of time walking, trying to note every little detail along the way, as well as, we have freeways. So what about options of capping the freeways? Currently, in the city, there are at least 5 freeway cap parks being proposed both by the city and nonprofit organizations, and this is one of the studio exercises of try to understand what it means to cap a freeway and how economically how it might help to invigorate the city and how new programs could be superimposed and added to the freeway itself. We also looked at phytoremediation because our sites are rail yards, oil fields, ports. How do you deal with that sort of land that's no longer reusable for a healthy environment? And we are left with no choice but to really push the envelope. The typology of corridors that we got streets, but how can we re-look at streets so that it functions at a different level as for ecology and for pedestrians, social conditions as well. And all of this is because we are living with an antiquated infrastructural system created after World War II, and an example of that being our pipe system. This, a couple years ago burst, and creating a sinkhole. So this poor fire truck just sort of buried itself in there. And to this day, nobody really knew what happened or what's the cause of it because there wasn't any data and recording showing where these pipes are located. So we're sort of in a panic these days as far as anything that happens with our city. And I'm sure this is not the only example that happens in LA. I'm sure other cities have similar situations. And so recently we looked at our work and we're thinking, well, a lot of these issues are actually sort of embedded in our projects, and how can we really look at our projects critically from a academic and research and point of view and try to understand what it is that we've been doing all this time. So we sort of came up with a definition. I'm sure this is one of the many possibilities, that landscape infrastructure is a methodology that expands the typical parameters of a designed landscape to a multifunctional, high-performance system, including those systems originally ascribed to traditional infrastructure. So within this book, there are issues of performance, perhaps through ecological corridors, in this case, Buffalo Bayou, that by understanding how it performs and ecologically, and as well as a storm retention system, river corridor, that we might be able to understand the project beyond what it looks like. So Gerdo will continue with the case studies. Yeah.
Having lived in the Bay Area and having been to grad school here, it's a unique kind of landscape. Moving to Los Angeles is, it's like frontier. Is anybody from Los Angeles here? All right, you got a couple, good. Go LA. LA is a unique place. So when Ying-Yu and I landed there, it was all about how should we try to understand this city so that it can affect how we work. And one of the first projects we got was this crazy project in Koreatown, which is one of the densest areas of Los Angeles at about 14,000 people per square mile. And it was a crazy developer, crazy project. This was happening when times were good, which is about 4 years ago. And they wanted everything, so what is everything? Well, everything in Los Angeles is really the people, the kind of cultural diversity that happens within a city. These kind of blocks represent the massing study that was done initially, and kind of our cartoons suggest that we need to incorporate the various cultures within our projects in order to understand what they could be. We also understand that LA is kind of a crazy media city. We love media, we love to explore and investigate different kinds of media, so this represents that potential. And LA is all about experimentation, that green roofs are more than green roofs, that they could be used for recreation, lifestyle, photovoltaic, etc. And so this mosaic image symbolizes that potential. And then finally, we've asked ourselves, well, what about the street? We're very interested in infrastructure, and what is the DNA of the street, as Ying-Yu put it. And can we carry that successfully into the building and into the spaces between the buildings to create the kind of identity for open space? And so with that, we started to investigate further, and we started to look at projects beyond LA as a way of keeping the balance in check. This is a project with the Shanghai Planning Bureau called Chengming Island. And this project is all about understanding how sediment is deposited in one of the most pristine or most important estuaries in the world. It's an important area for Shanghai. It's at the mouth of the Yangtze River. You can kind of see in that diagram. And these series of diagrams try to explore how is water moving through that mouth and what is the mechanisms that structure water, i.e. levee systems. And we mapped all of these areas, and in this sequence kind of shows how the shoreline developed over time and through sediment. It became of a natural system, but then as Shanghai grew, the need to give structure to these islands became paramount. And so the competition was about, well, if sedimentation is part of the issue, how can we incorporate sedimentation into a kind of future for expansion of the Shanghai population? That's a quick master plan, not as important as the process of argument. We didn't win this project, by the way, mainly because we felt that there was a need to explore a certain kind of logic that is possible with government. And governments are difficult, but if you can give a good argument and establish some kind of logic, we thought we had a chance. So this was our logic, and essentially there are farmlands in the area now, and we were arguing for wetlands as a way to incorporate the sedimentation of the Yangtze River and create new land that could be used for parks and recreation and a new infrastructure for new development. And so what you're looking at here is essentially, the diamond has value, and it's easy to understand that. Water is a resource, it has value, really easy to understand. But how do you put a price tag on wetlands? How do you structure the economic value of that? We looked at diminishing marginal utility with this little diagram off to the left in terms of food production and the value of food relative to what culture or country or economic status resides in whatever food production is available. And so with that kind of logic, we started to explore how does sedimentation actually accumulate? How is this new land created? And through a series of modeling, which I don't have here today, but and through a structure of natural systems and bamboo systems, structure sediment as they move through the system, and a kind of ecological culture evolves from the sedimentation of sand over hundreds of years. So maybe that's why we didn't win, because it wasn't the 5-year fix, it was the 100-year, 150-year fix, which if you're talking about sustainability, sometimes that's a scale that you have to think about. But we also investigated the different species of wildlife and fish and birds that might occupy these new ecologies. We structured ways in which we can look at renewable energy across 100 square miles of land. MAC is a competition in Korea. Seoul, Korea is 23 million. It's probably changing as we speak. But as one of the top urban areas in terms of population in the world, this became an interesting project for us in that we asked ourselves the question: if these cities are maximizing their footprint ecologically and in terms of carrying capacity, then is it right for these cities to grow in an unstructured way? How can you give structure to that kind of growth? The proposal here looks at 500,000 people for an area just south of Seoul. Balmori won the competition for the master plan of the core area. I'm not sure where it is currently. But this project was about the land adjacent to it. It was about, it's about 100 square kilometers of land. You can see in the photo above. And as a competition, it's all about trying to establish an idea. This shows you just kind of quickly the context of it. And, you know, for many reasons, there's nothing really unique about the site. It's currently used for agriculture. You can see the pattern. You can see the topographical challenges around it. So it makes sense that it becomes this open space. It's easy. And so we tried to bring some logic into it. We looked at precedents. You know, how has parks evolved? And we all know, especially with Charles here and the other faculty, that ecological processes are paramount now in these large-scale tracts of land, that they simply have to be multifunctional for the kind of ecological systems that are being proposed. And so these are just a quick way to talk about that. But then, you know, how do you establish the grid? You know, urban design is many things to many people, but to a site that doesn't have very strong characteristics other than farmlands, we felt that the grid system needed to be established as a kind of flexible framework for how this city could grow. And so based on this study, we determined that this project might have a 100-meter by 200-meter block size. It's a little larger than Los Angeles, certainly larger than New York, but not as large as Beijing or Seoul. And so what we created then was this flexible framework that, again, isn't about solving the project in a year or 5 years. It was about 100 years, and that 500,000 people will need time to adapt to a place that is quite foreign. These diagrams are very typical of the kind of work that's done at this scale. You have to map and quantify and inventory the natural systems that are critical to how an area could evolve with 500,000 people. We started to look at potential for topography to be incorporated into the project and different characteristics, and certainly the hydrology of the land and maintaining the capacity of the flood zone while incorporating new programs for recreation and open space. This diagram starts to kind of turn the corner a little bit. It starts to take everything that we talked about previously and starting to put it into something that is quite tangible. And what you see here is basically a map that shows different areas of exploration for open space programming. And it'll be a little more clear with this system. What we did is, over the course of 50 years, we tried to predict the future patterning of this land. And what you're seeing here, the core area, that Balmori master plan is off to the left, and of course then the open space. What's green and orange and red represents the more active uses, more kind of commerce-driven, recreation-driven. The green areas represent the more productive landscapes, agriculture, natural systems, parks, restoration, conservation areas. And these two lines off to the right, you can see the population at 150,000 people, and then the way in which the programs are prioritized. And the quick observation is that pretty heavy green colors, meaning more passive uses, and less of the dominant red colors, less of the active uses. So to predict then, 5 years later, maybe you have 300,000 people, and the active uses start to migrate into that green structure. And we would think that if something like this were able to move forward, that we could actually maybe even experiment with some parametric urbanism to set criteria for ways in which these activities could move into the landscape. And then at 2030, 500,000 people, again, trying to predict the future for 500,000 people that might see an integrated solution that really blends the needs with current time. I think the one thing we're most interested in is trying to create landscapes and programming that are relevant to that particular time. Sometimes master plans, just by what they do, aren't flexible enough. And so this is just a quick diagram that shows kind of a charting of 30 or 40 years of a particular kind of landscape. So if you see that little diagram to the top, it's a rice field. But in a few years, depending on soil conditions and water, it could transform into an open meadow through sedimentation. If the sedimentation continues and is left unstructured and just left unkept in a natural state, it could become a forest, which can then have more habitat value and create a new structure for open space that is based on time. And again, not the 5-year or the 1-year fix. California Academy of Sciences, many of you probably already know, and we probably shouldn't even talk about this project that much, but we're using this project as a setup to another green roof project that we recently completed in Shanghai. This is, of course, in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, the existing building. Renzo Piano is the architect. And the idea was to look at a restoration and a renovation of the project by incorporating this really large 10-acre green roof on top of it, kind of a hat, but a high-performance hat. And these mounds are both reminiscent of the hills of San Francisco, but also meant to incorporate interior programs for different uses within the building, as well as having penetrations through the roof for ventilation, heating, and cooling, and then a little platform at the top for educational interpretive uses. This is one of the projects that we profiled in our book. We took all the technology that went into it, which at the time it was built, which was maybe 4 years ago now. It was pretty much state-of-the-art green roof. It was probably more state-of-the-art now. But we were dealing with steep slopes. We were dealing with issues of aspect. We were just dealing with issues of native plants that had to perform. We were dealing with the need for irrigation. We also had a lot of pressure to create a landscape that performed. This diagram shows kind of the inputs on the top in that kind of light yellow color, and then the kind of output in the darker green color to the bottom left in terms of what the inputs are and what we get out of it in terms of performance. Quickly, a lot of it was photovoltaic, and then of course 100,000 plants were installed and this 15-centimeter thick living roof. The process of building this green roof was a very unique experience. It was basically a mock-up of a new roof every day. And the folks at SWA that worked on this, John Loomis and Larry Reed, I think worked extremely hard and collaboratively with engineers and architects to establish a system that was all about, in a way, maintenance. These gabion walls not only held back the soil and the roots during the growing season, but they also provided a network for maintenance when the folks can get out there and investigate the plants and see how they're doing. We also worked with plant specialists and ecologists in inventing basically a cocoa tray. So these are coconut fibers that you see here that have enough rigidity in it to hold soil for about 3 or 4 years, and then they deteriorate. And once they deteriorate, well, then they're replaced with root mass. So that kind of transitional approach really worked, and because they're kind of, if you can see at the top left, how they're stacked against each other, that provides the friction that they need to prevent from sliding down during a big rainstorm. During the course of 2 years, they experimented with something like 100 native plants, and we ended up with about 9 plants that performed in the way that the Academy wanted it to perform. It's an amazing green roof. If you've never visited, it's worth a look. It's become one of the big destinations in San Francisco, which is great for green roofs because we feel that it does have something to teach. Butterflies have returned to this part of the Golden Gate Park, and they had to create a docent program because so many people were getting up on that roof wanting to have answers. And so on any given weekend, there's about 7 of these folks out there with our details and other things, educating the public about green roofs. And it's funny because I went out there one time and, this woman said she wanted to put it on her house, and this guy was really nice. He's like, okay, well, it's really expensive. And she said, well, but I thought this is the way to go. I thought this is, it's sustainable and it's green. And I think it's this kind of docent program that will help transition what you see versus what might happen at a scale of a house. And we're interested in continuing to educate the general public about the benefits of green roofs. Giant Interactive is one of Ying-Yu's project and is one of the projects that actually benefited from the work we did at California Academy.
Yeah, so Giant Interactive is a sort of high-tech campus. Actually, it's more like not just like high-tech campus, but also the CEO lives there and the manager lives there. So the whole kingdom of Giant Interactive Group lives there. And so we collaborated with many different architects. It's in Shanghai. It's outside of the central city. It's in one of those satellite cities, neighborhoods outside of Shanghai. So we decided we wanted to work with Morphosis Tom Mang because we were recently sort of just captivated by his thought process and his design approach. So we asked him to work with us, and what he ended up doing is something that is the most difficult thing to do. He actually wanted to do this huge green roof, and knowing that we had experience with California Academy of Sciences, he really wanted to experiment it there in Shanghai. And so this project was just completed maybe a year ago, and then the green roof was installed over the last year, and it has done really, really well. In terms of plant materials, we have some of these. There's an assortment of sedums as well as some other seasonal plant materials, and a lot of the roof itself is actually bigger than the Academy of Sciences, and at some places it's actually more than 1-to-1 slope. And so this is in China. The way the construction works there is very, very different than the United States. It's much more disorganized, and a lot of times you're put in a crisis mode of trying to figure out what to do next. This is an example of how we decided to deal with this really steep roof, being that we sort of inserted these the stumps or the feet into the slope, and so that the gabion cages that you saw for Academy could be laid across, using these stumps as props to hold them vertically. And then, and on top of that, we sprayed this sort of hydroseeding material that's usually used for highway erosion control. And then the contractor would not disclose the secret recipe that he was using. So we didn't really have anything to offer in that regard, although I did try to look around and see what I could find. But anyways, this is what it looks like today. It's, very low maintenance. Because the plants just grow, kind of takes over. And I guess Morphosis design, they have tried, it's a campus that consists of different parts. Some, there is the workers' offices and workstations above, and on the first floor, there's a cafeteria, there's a gym, there's even a pool for the workers, so that there's these corridors that sort of cut through the roof. So I guess in an effort to integrate the interior with the exterior. And so the feel part, it's another story that I'll say for another day. It's actually pretty difficult to kind of oversee a project of this size and complexity. And so this green roof, we hope this is a good lesson, that maybe perhaps we could come up with new ways of doing it in the future. Okay, so Milton. Yeah.
So back to Los Angeles, we're currently working with the Mountains Recreation Conservation Area and the City of Los Angeles in trying to figure out what to do with the banks of the Bayou Creek and the LA River. I think Mia Lair was here, I think a year ago with the LA River studio. So we're working on Bayou Creek, which is west of the LA River, but still a large watershed. And I think the whole goal from the MRCA and the city of LA is to try to experiment a little, work within a certain kind of budget, but provide something for the community that they want, but then have something the city can brag about. And when they say brag about, what they really are trying to say is that they can go to a conference and say that we have this state-of-the-art park along the banks of Bayou Creek, and it's going to be a precedent for what we're going to do along both sides of Bayou Creek, in the next 15 years. So big challenge. This one is interesting because that red line represents the 7-mile Bayou Creek Trail, which is it's an amazing trail. If the two of you who've ever from LA, if you've ever ridden your bike there, it's safe, and it does go through Culver City and other parts of the area. But what's more interesting about it is that everyone uses it as a conduit to get to the beach. It's like it's a pass-through. Nobody really thinks about the experience between the 2 points, and therein lies our project. As many of you know, the channelized creeks and rivers in LA are just pretty terrible. And how do you address these kinds of issues? That's our site right there, that little sliver right here is our project. It's a little over an acre. It's a little over 1,000 feet. This is a middle school. And then all of this is single-family detached townhomes, very LA horizontal kind of fabric. This is the one point where you have brackish water. So this is tidal up to this point. From this point forward, it's a dam, and this is all fresh water. So with our park along this strip, the brackish water, the need to create a sense of place for this project became really the challenge. It's a pretty standard site, nothing special. Typical levee engineering. All of these soils are probably the spoils of Bayou Creek when it was excavated and built by the Army Corps of Engineers. So, the soils are native but highly compacted. There's a kind of community use for the middle school. Daytime is different than the weekends. Weekends are kind of pickup games, football, soccer. And then because this is brackish, you're starting to see some real habitat and vegetation being created. And then, of course, the wildlife tends to be attracted to areas that are a little bit more ecologically diverse. It's not very remarkable. The outreach process, however, was very remarkable. And if you've ever gone through an outreach process in LA, you pretty much can't walk into these meetings with any kind of preconception about what it is. And through the kind of process we went through, we ended up with actually something quite remarkable, we feel. And what we did essentially is we carved up this very thin section into these high-performance systems. One being this bike trail. We continue the bike trail, but we actually, along the entire 7 miles, this is the only section where it actually moves inland, away from the creek, which then creates this respite of an open space right adjacent to the creek. Everywhere else on the 7 miles, you're biking right up against the concrete edge of the creek. And then working with SOMAS engineers, we created our kind of treatment train for water harvesting. We took all the sub-watersheds within this area, and we're running it through our park system through active surface treatment and subsurface treatment, as well as working with the city of LA and creating the first green street in the city that actively takes on porous paving and pass-through planters within the right-of-way. And it's a new thing for the city, and we're working with the city's Green Streets Committee to facilitate that. The section of it is again, fairly simple. By moving the bike path off to the land side, we're able to create this open space park. This perspective shows how the bike path starts to move around, create the respite, an overlook, an area for bicycles, and areas for seating. And so programmatically, it's what the community wanted, but in terms of a design and a process, it has a lot to do with how people will use it and how natural systems might infiltrate it. These are just some of the metrics. And then again, the treatment train and the water harvesting process. Buffalo Bayou is a good project in many ways. This is the work of Kevin Shanley. And looking at the historic bayou, anybody from Texas? One. Really, is that it? One? Okay. Well then, maybe you've been to the bayou, right? And the bayou is basically just a languid body of water that moves so slow you can't even see it move. And it basically moves an entire watershed. There's another image here. You can see here's Galveston Bay. There's Houston here. And this entire area is a watershed. And it's probably 10 times larger than Los Angeles basin. And the issue here is the city wanted to reconnect with its past. It was a place for recreation, to promenade. It was a place for the buffalo fish. But you know, it was this. This was the reality. It was a dangerous place. You wouldn't want to be there in the evening. Maybe daytime might be kind of dicey. It was a place for trash. It was really the space underneath freeways that we know all too familiar with. It was an area of high erosion. Basically, the water flowed right off of the downtown streets and right into the bayou in the downtown section, heavily eroded, weedy, again, sedimentary deposits along both sides. And it would flood. It flooded the banks frequently. And so the city was trying to really deal with this reality, and you can see the kind of the leftover after the floods. And what we came up with Kevin and his team is a notion that by understanding the infrastructure, which is the river itself, or the bayou, and understanding its context within downtown Los Angeles, we might, sorry, what did I say? Los Angeles, sorry. Downtown Houston, we might start to look at a new way in which to incorporate the natural ecosystem of the bayou while incorporating the needs of a new downtown that wants to reinvigorate itself. And so a system of thinking went into understanding different aspects of how water moves through a landscape, through a corridor. The existing slope was 2-to-1, which is fairly steep. The edges were broken up. They were not controlled. They were very unstable. The flood elevation was very high adjacent to roads. The velocity of water as it moves through during these flood events was extremely fast. And when you have fast-moving water, then you have incredible erosion. And there was also a lot of traditional concrete retaining walls. And so off to the right was the logic that we put into it in order to imagine a different future for the Buffalo Bayou in downtown Houston. Bigger slopes, looking at the horizontal migration of water through sedimentary soils. By making a 3-to-1 slope, you then increase the flood elevation capacity, and then slowing down the velocity through plant material as well as gabion walls became the kind of approach that we used. And so this section shows the existing slope and then the proposed slope that was integrated into the project and the gabion walls to address this kind of event. The built project is extraordinary in so many ways. We've heard from different groups, especially the Buffalo Bayou Partnership, that facilitated a lot of the funding and support for the project, that there's been a huge return to the river from the community and from local investment, and also for wildlife. these drawings show the kind of the engineering that went into creating these gabion wall systems. But more importantly, the research that went into looking at root structure. And that when you have these kind of high capacity, high velocity flood events, if you have shallow rooted plants, it's just going to take everything away. And so plants like Rubelia and other plants that are semi-native or native became the structure to control the banks without having to do extensive retaining walls. And so the result then was a project that, like I said, it tried to preserve certain kinds of wildlife, endangered wildlife, but also became more of a passive respite for the community, a place to jog, a place to ride your bike, a place to connect from one area to another. It's a hot spot for kayakers who are making their way down the bayou. This is one of many bridges, pedestrian bridges, that are being built now to connect the Houston downtown fabric to other areas. It's revitalizing both sides of the bayou. We worked with a lighting consultant from France who brought in LED to create these amazing illuminated structures underneath the freeway with lighting. And in the end, the kind of entangled infrastructure is both kind of poetic in a way, but also a way to give identity back to the city. And it's just become an amazing place, super popular, and something that is going to be continued on both the upper reaches of the bayou as well as the lower reaches of the bayou.
I believe this is our last case study. This is Goob pedestrian promenade, also in Shanghai. The site is really located on the west of the river itself, the Huangpu River. It's more in the suburbs area, the newer expansions of the city. We were asked to come in and really look at this space, this long pedestrian corridor here. Originally, cars. This was really for cars, but the city decided that they wanted to try something different, and they made this become. They zoned it into this completely pedestrian-oriented corridor. The entire length of this corridor is approximately 700 meters long, and with the widest part about 60 meters wide. So the question about a promenade or a pedestrian circulation system in Shanghai in the modern era, prompted us to really look at what it looked like historically. And historically, as a lot of you might know, that Shanghai, the Linong areas, really they consist of very, very narrow alleyways. Some of them are as wide as 3 feet. Barely somebody could walk through without bumping into another person. And the alleyways were really where life occurs, because these were basically tenement homes back then, very crowded. And so activities from the inside spill out to the outside. So you can see in the old photos where barber shops were out on the street, as well as vendors, as well as somebody washing dishes and cooking, because there were no infrastructure within these tenement homes. So we were interested in that, but at the same time, given the realities of today's modern Shanghai, a lot of these things sort of were considered, but at the same time needed to be appropriate for today's needs. Another issue about Shanghai is its population density. Shanghai is very, very dense compared to LA and London. It's one of the densest places where, again, there is a general lack of open space, or if there are, they're very hard to get to. And so, as you can see, the open space in Shanghai is really just 3%, and this is acres per residence. And so what we had sought to do with this pedestrian promenade is to create as much open space and greenery as possible. One of the typical situations with dense urban environments is lack of trees, and it seems kind of an obvious thing to do. why can't we plant trees in a city to counter all the, all the smog, all the driving, all the temperature, heat island effect. So one of the goals that we had set for ourselves very early on was just to plant trees, no matter what happens. So we managed to plant about 1,100 trees. And just curious, we thought, well, how does 1,100 trees able to generate? It's actually able to reduce it's actually able to sequester carbon for the amount of 5,465 metric tons, which is equivalent to 1,000 cars over 2 months. So this is what we had day one. It's paved over. It's an open slate. What do you do with that kind of buildings that are over 20 stories tall, 100 meters tall? So over the years, this was a long project, took more than 5 years to complete. And we started from the very western side of the corridor and slowly migrated towards the east. This is the plan view. Aside from the actual corridor itself, we were also, responsible for putting in 2 parks at both ends. So a lot of those trees also came from these urban parks right here. So originally, the program on the east block was consist of mostly shopping storefronts, and so we had lots of outdoor spaces for that use. The central block really was the widest space where lots of the community events might happen, and also these kind of scheduled programmed events and local like post office, grocery stores would happen here. Just backtrack a little bit, this project is actually made of 6 neighborhoods. So within each of these neighborhoods, they have their own gardens. This is the only publicly shared promenade in this entire project. So most people can't really get into these private gardens. So we did try to plant trees, and hopefully over the years, a lot of these are zelkovas. They have started to fill in, and in the hot summer days, these are actually the most comfortable places to go. We have tried to install bioswales within this park as a way of cleaning some of that water sheet flowing from the hard surfaces. And also fountains. Fountains is actually a challenge in most places because they turn the water off. And, if there's no water, you're left with a bathtub. And so we didn't want to go that route. We look for materials that actually can create interest. In this case, these are glass tiles that were sort of improvised from, different environment, took them out to the outside and used them as part of this fountain design. And I mean, it is one of the projects we try to experiment with materials, and fortunately we had a client who was very supportive and kind of went along with us and looking for all these, challenges, and it turned out to be quite, nice. This is one of the follies that we designed. Originally was meant to be resting places, but, they decided that why not create some sort of revenue to support the long-term maintenance of this corridor, because it is, after all, a government-owned corridor. So it's a bakery has, come rented the space, and it has become the central locus of activities here. This is the Central Plaza. It's actually really, really nice. On weekends, lots of families come here. And then this is a second folly structure we had designed. We also thought of using traditional architecture elements such as the roof tiles and using that as a kind of inspiration to create these porous pavers as a way to sort of recall something that happened in the past. So I think we just wanted to say that as much as we are interested in these larger urban scale issues, at the end of the day, we are also designers, and that these materials and details matter greatly in our projects, and we hope that they help making these environments better. So that's what. conclude.
Sure. To conclude this lecture, we thought we'd kind of leave you with maybe a few remarks and ideas about one of our projects, the Academy. Because it has so much exposure right now, we felt it ripe to criticize. And since this lecture is about trying to project alternative futures for projects, we thought we would begin with this one, and that maybe 2 years from now, this green roof is still utilizing irrigation water. Our original intent was to cut off the water after the plants have established, but because it's so popular with the Academy, they want to keep it green. They don't accept letting the plants go through their natural stage of dying off. It becomes brown, and then it'll become green again. Because they want it to be kind of evergreen, we felt that, well, maybe there is another future for this green roof and for other green roofs, that maybe we can start to look at different kinds of programs that could utilize large areas. They become actually land banks for different kinds of activities that might happen in the future. If land becomes more scarce, perhaps we can farm these green roofs and make them more for the community. And also, maintenance is always kind of the biggest issue with the work that we do as landscape architects is, well, it looks great, but what is the longevity of that landscape? How does it weather? How do you maintain it? And so the notion that we can operate in this profession, thinking about future scenarios, is always going to be a good direction for academia and for professional practice. Thank you. Any questions?
I'm very curious to know, how was your experience in China? The projects were very interesting and remarkable in terms of details and the finishing touches. But I would like to hear more. How did you communicate with the clients? How did you find that experience? And how did you find a client who accepted to finish a project in 5 years?
I think working in China is actually both very exciting, but also very frustrating, because, I was telling somebody the schedules are usually just absolutely ridiculous, and a lot of your design get compromised because of schedule. But I don't know if it's true in the US, but the relationship between the designer and the client is absolutely important. Being able to talk to them and then make them understand the reasonings behind certain decisions and certain design intentions help to make those things happen. And in our case, I think generation gap sometimes plays a role in this kind of thing. I find the younger generation of designers tend to be a lot more open-minded and willing to try new things versus some of the more older design clients. They're sort of accustomed to one way of doing things, and it's harder to convince them to explore other options. So Goob took 5 years, actually probably longer from the beginning to the end, but it just takes a lot of time of communicating and constantly trying different ways of doing something. Yeah.
With the work on the stream in Los Angeles, I've forgotten the name, Grant Park?
Bayou Creek.
Bayou Creek. I was wondering, what was the interaction with the city and even the Corps of Engineers with the construction of something so close to such an entrenched piece of infrastructure that has been repeatedly left entrenched through decades and decades of changes around it.
Right. Yeah, I don't know if this is working or not. Army Corps of Engineers was the first group that had to be contacted. And with the Army Corps of Engineers, all they did was they took out this diagram that was their typical trapezoid, and they said, okay, Gerdo, as long as you don't go above it or go into it, well, I mean above it, meaning within a certain height above the trapezoid of where the water volume moved through, as long as you didn't get into that trapezoid, they were kind of okay. I think the city of Los Angeles was more concerned about, who's going to maintain it. And because our client technically is the Mountains Conservation and Recreation Area, which is a nonprofit, they kind of took on the responsibility of maintaining the park, throughout the years, and then working with the city in terms of dealing with the Green Street, which is going to become the new precedent for bringing Green Street technology to Los Angeles.
I've got a question. So both of you were students here in the 1990s, not so long ago. Gerdo, you had a hand in the formation of Asia GSD, among other things. And so I'm just thinking, we spend a lot of time talking about what aspects of education might be durable. From my own experience, I know that at least half of what I learned in my education, undergraduate, graduate, lasted less than 5 years. And at the time, it wasn't entirely clear to me what would persist with any durability or not. And so I don't know about you guys. I would love to hear more about what your experience was here, especially in terms of what you think was, durable. Like what was of some value that impacts your work?
You sure you want to hear this? Yeah. I'll talk about Asia GSD real quick. When we started that thing, the entire faculty told us not to do it. Is Peter Rowe here? He's not here. Okay, good. I can tell this story then. So there was 5 of us, right? We said, hey, we need some kind of external activity. There's Harvard Asian Law Society, there's Harvard Asian Business School, so all these other external student groups going on, but there wasn't really much happening here. We had a student council, right? And it was okay. But at the time when I was here, Asia was doing incredible things, but there was no real dialogue, no structured dialogue. So we started doing our Asia GSD thing in studio, and that pissed them all off. And they went straight to Peter Rowe, all the faculty, and said, damn it, these kids are doing this Asia GSD thing, and they're talking about having a conference here. How can they do that? They need to do studio. That's the priority, a studio. And I'm not going to argue with that. Studio is your number one priority because that's where, the ideation happens. That's where the critical dialogue happens. But you still need other outlets in which to talk to other people. And if there's one value that you get out of being here is being out there and talking to other students at other schools, Kennedy School of Government, Harvard Business School. I mean, there's incredible people over there. And so that's one takeaway is if you have ideas that maybe aren't studio related but are about other things, give it a shot. Harvard's willing to take it on. So what happened is, just to close the loop on that story, is when the faculty realized that this thing was real, that we were calling all these folks, that people were coming here, people were giving us money. I know you guys have this bucket of money for student organizations, right? That didn't exist when we were here. We basically did all the funding. We actually had money left over after every semester. And anyway, what I'm saying is that the faculty, once they kind of got a hold of what we were doing, actually jumped in. And Peter Rowe became the biggest advocate for Asia GSD as well as other faculty, and they participated in the symposiums and conferences with us afterwards. And for me, it's very satisfying to know that, but it's also interesting to hear about how Asia GSD has kind of, it's like a multifaceted thing now, right? There's like China GSD and Korea GSD and Russian GSD, and then that's an interesting evolution of a student organization that I think is all about what Harvard's trying to do, is trying to kind of support you and the kind of things that you want to do. Do you want to add anything? Was it terrible here for you?
Well, it was definitely different. I think Gerdo had a big social life here. Meanwhile, for me, it was a lot of research. I remember having George Hargrave's studio, and he told me, well, your landscape is about wind, aeolian landscape. I said, aeolian, that's an interesting word. And he wouldn't tell me how to go about doing it. So instead, I had to go to all kinds of libraries, the science library, engineering library, trying to really look for information about wind, water, tides, and I came across these really esoteric, engineering formulas and papers, and just trying to understand how these kind of different things affect landscape. And so it's a lot of digging information, without a lot. It kind of makes me stronger in that sense, because these days I ask students to do the same. Don't just come up with an idea, but where did you find these resources? And it might not be available here, but it only makes you stronger and makes you realize that your design is not within you, but it includes many other kinds of disciplines. It's a multidisciplinary sort of experience. So, and just one more thing is, I found that ecology plays such an important role in everything I do. That's always the first question I ask whenever there is a project, a site. How does the natural systems work, and how does design how does design behave within those systems? And it's almost impossible to come up with anything without understanding the site and its all various layers. So.